they've given him a piece of paper to send him on his way. He was here from 1995 to 2000 as the pulpit minister here, did a fine job while he was here, and then went to Yucaipa. And now currently he is at the Magnolia Center congregation here in Riverside. He is endured by his wife, Leslie, and his daughter, Adrian, and their son, Peter. Why don't you stand up so everybody knows who you are? I know, Adrian, you know where she is. Having played ball with Peter, I mean endured. We're glad to have them here today. Young Peter is in South Africa as we speak. I think he's there for the next month, is that correct? Serving there. He's currently a student at Harding University, and Adrian is attending Yucaipa High. Peter himself was born in Zambia, that's in northern Rhodesia. He was baptized into Christ in 1969 and has been preaching the gospel since 1975. So we want to welcome Peter Muster. Peter, preach the word.
I want to give thanks to Big God, especially for his tremendous enthusiasm for mission work. I was overwhelmed as I came through your foyer area to see so many areas of involvement that you are currently engaged with. What an exciting thing to be a part of a work that's dynamic and that's growing. And as I was thinking about my presentation this morning, I was thinking about those who were part of the original group that were here. And if I'm not mistaken, that was the Harmons, that was the Quicks, and that was the Stones back in the early 80s. And they had somewhat of a vision that maybe something would happen in the Temecula Murrieta area one day. And lo and behold, what a fine auditorium you have. It's wonderful to see so many seats just filled up with people who are excited and enthusiastic and just really gung-ho for the Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. So I'm just really happy to be here and to be a part of this group as we speak this morning. I was told that I only have 30 minutes. I have about 5 hours worth of material, so somehow we're going to cram that in. And I presume somebody's standing somewhere going to be doing this when it's time. Don't start the track off. I understand that right now there are 6 billion people that live on this planet. And here we are, about 300 people sitting here. Well, what are we going to do about it? Pretty awesome, isn't it? I don't know what 6 billion is. I don't know what a million is. I don't know even what 1,000 is. I think at some point in my life I've had about $100 in my bank account, so I can think about 100. But a million, 6 billion people, that's an unbelievable number to think about. And you think about all of the difficulties that are happening in the world right now, the AIDS epidemic. And you think about SARS that is taking a hold of various parts of the world. You think about the pressures that are taking hold of the Middle East and places like that. And yet we are called to preach the gospel somehow to these people throughout the entire world that we know it, not only here in the United States, but also through Africa and India, China, the Middle East, and other places. Someone came to our congregation the other day and he said, "You realize that in the United States of America, the church is not growing?" It's one of the only places in the world where the church is really not growing anymore. And most places where the churches are growing is because other folks have just been coming in from other areas. But that brings you to an interesting point. This congregation has really grown over the last few years. And the question I would like for you to think about as we go into this lesson is, why? Why is this congregation growing? And why are you here today? And what is it that God perhaps has in store for you and for the work here in Murrieta? Is there something that God is raising this congregation up to do and to accomplish? So a number of things that I want to cover this morning as we go into this lesson. But I want to think seriously about your role in the church, not only here in Murrieta, but also throughout the entire world. I remember in my earlier days with working with the congregation here, people were talking about, wouldn't it be wonderful if this congregation could plant other congregations throughout the area? And I remember we were in Temecula thinking, wouldn't it be great if we could plant a church in Murrieta one day? Well, here's the church in Murrieta. I wonder if it's time to start thinking about planting another church in Temecula. You think that you are up to that at this particular point in time, ready and gung-ho to get the work really going, and just being a dynamic force for the Lord here in Southern California. I'm excited to tell you that my son is in Zambia right now. He's junior at Harding University. He's in a medical program, and there's a possibility that he might even become a doctor. Well, I don't know. With bills these days, $200,000 he might be looking at just with student fees. We'll be taking some money off of the lesson this morning if you're in bed. But wouldn't it be wonderful if we could raise up our children so that they could go into different parts of the world doing different kinds of things? Now, I don't know if he'll be a doctor. He might become a physician assistant. Who knows what he might become? But the fact is that we are encouraged and we are challenged to look for opportunities to have our children engage in mission activities. And as I look out this morning, I'm impressed by how many young people are in the auditorium right now. Is it possible that we need to be thinking about our children and raising them up with that kind of attitude so that when they get to be 16 or 17 or 18, they already have in their minds the need to be engaged in some kind of mission work? Several years ago, I listened to a man preach a sermon, and he said that one of the statistics is that children who are raised in the mission field become extremely excited and strong and firm and committed in their faith, more so than children who are raised on the home front. Now, let me just clarify that a little bit. A church that has a mission emphasis, a mission mind, will raise children that will engage in mission activities and have the desire to go out and be mission-minded and carry the work of the gospel. Do you think it's somewhat interesting that when God had not only created the world, but that when He decided that He would seek and save those who were lost, that He put in the arms of a young maiden the baby Jesus? That in the arms of Mary would be carried the one who would come forth to be the Savior of the world. And do you think it's strange that Jesus went out and He chose 12 men who were uneducated, as is found out in the book of Acts, that people recognized these folks that were with Jesus to not have any academic skill whatsoever, but yet in the arms of these 12 men, Judas having gone and been replaced, but in the arms and in the mouth and in the feet and the wherewithal of these people would be those who would proclaim the gospel throughout the entire world. And so I'm thinking about your position here at Murrieta. Is it possible that God is giving you up, raising you for an opportunity for you to be great spokesmen for the gospel, not only here in Murrieta, but also throughout the entire world? And what a tremendous challenge that is, because when we think about 6 billion people, we think this is just simply too many people for us to even comprehend. How is it possible that I can contact or touch 6 billion people? Well, I don't think that I can. But I know that I can touch at least one person. I can touch one person this year. And I believe that the church in Magnolia Center can grow because of the one person that I think about, and that I pray about, and that I associate with, and that I take opportunity to encourage and to stimulate and to cause that individual to know more and more about Jesus Christ. Imagine one person a year. As I mentioned a little while ago, the statistics that came out from Barna were that churches of Christ, along with all other churches, are really not growing, except that they receive growth from other churches. So if the Baptist church is growing, it's because they're getting some members from the Methodist church. And if the Methodist church is growing, it's because they're getting some members from the evangelical movement. People are moving across the Christian playground from one church to another, and churches that are growing up thinking that this is what God is bringing us together to this point for. But perhaps what we need to be thinking about is how do we reach our neighbor? How do we reach the person that's sitting next to us? The person who's not only on the bus going to work with us, not only sitting in our job-confined areas, but how do we reach the person that lives next door to us? How do we reach these individuals and bring them to Jesus Christ? We all have a tremendous opportunity. I'm just really glad that I'm a part of a group that's being dynamic. For this congregation to have elders and deacons, and thinking about hiring a youth minister is a tremendous thing in my mind. To see you grow to the point where you are right now, where you can not only reach out to this community, but also into the entire world. At the end of this month, I'm going to be going to South Africa, and I appreciate the help that you've given me to do that. There's a congregation that we'll be working with called the Davidson Church of Christ. These folks now have elders. I feel just an overwhelming sense of accomplishment that we have been a part of the work in Africa where they now have elders. The congregation has about 300 to 400 people that attend on a regular basis. Every day these folks are going out, reaching out to their neighbors, bringing them in. And so when I go over there with my brother and another friend, Vincent Hawkins from the Normandy Church of Christ, we're going to be going out, holding a gospel meeting, trying to encourage more people. Then after that gospel meeting, we're heading up to Vendoland, which is now called Limpopo. This is in the northern regions of South Africa. And we're going to be holding 2 gospel meetings up there. And another congregation, the church at Chidibini in Vendoland, also now has elders. But what I'm suggesting to you is that it takes vision, it takes forethought, it takes individual thinking. You know, I think that we have the potential. I think that we can do it. I think that if we look at ourselves and consider who we are, and consider our strengths, that we can start planting churches, and we can, maybe in the next 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years, that we can be such an influence in a different area that things can grow. Just 20 years ago, those 3 families, the Harmonies and the Stones and the Coyts, probably thought, I wonder what it would be like in 20 or 30 years' time if there would be a church like this here at this place. But because of their thoughts, and because you, in your turn and in your time, moved into this area, you have caused the growth of the church in this place. You are responsible for the church growing in this area. And so, in that same light, we need to be thinking about how we can influence the world in the same way. In 20 years' time, we might think that that's just too far for us to be thinking about. It's too far ahead. But yet, that's what we need to be thinking about. We need to be setting goals 1 year, 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years down the road. Because who knows, because of your forethought, because of your desire, the church can grow in a dynamic way in different areas of the world. A little while ago, I was encouraged to look at the book of Acts to try to find out what was it that caused the church to grow in such a dynamic way in Jerusalem. And so I have some facts and figures that I'd like to share with you, and as we take a look just briefly through the book of Acts. But first of all, in John chapter 20 and verse 29, Jesus had been speaking to Thomas, and the other disciples were there as well. And the one thing that specifically Jesus said to Thomas was, "Blessed are you because you have seen and believed." Now, you and I have never seen Jesus Christ. We will see him again when he comes again in his glory. But we have never physically been with him. We've never shaken his hand. We've never spoken with him. We've never eaten a meal with him. We didn't see him as he came off the cross. So Jesus says to Thomas and those disciples that are gathered there, "Blessed are you who believe as you have seen." Now, what are you going to do about it, Thomas? What are you going to do about it, John? What are you going to be doing about it, Peter and the other disciples? What does this mean to you now that you've seen me alive? Is this going to cause something in your mind? Are you going to be thinking about your responsibility? I know that you have a host of different things that you need to be thinking about. You've got jobs to take care of. You've got families to take care of. You've got your homes to take care of. You've got a multitude of different things that go through your mind as you process through your daily living experience as to what you need to be doing. But I want to encourage you, never leave the Lord out of the equation. It's absolutely imperative that you and I see ourselves as God's instrument to carry the gospel to the entire world. And if we don't, who will? That's the burning question. If we in the churches of Christ don't stand up and say, this is my responsibility, I'm going to take it on my shoulders to make sure that the gospel goes to all the world, who will? So, if we accept this responsibility, what are we now going to do about it? Because you see in Matthew chapter 28, Jesus said not only to the disciples, but also to us, because this is what has been recorded. Go into all the world and preach the gospel. For a long time I thought this word go meant simply to certain people. And into all the world meant to be Africa and India and China and other places like that. But what Jesus is really saying to the disciples, and what he's saying to you and to me, is to go into your communities and preach the gospel. Now there's a specific message that we need to be preaching as we go out, and we'll take a look at that in just a little while. But briefly, let me just share with you a number of interesting dynamics that take place in the book of Acts. There were a number of individuals that needed to go out on short missionary excursions. I wish that I could have been a missionary and just stayed in one place for the entire duration of my life. I think that would have been a really beneficial thing. If I had just stayed in South Africa, just stayed with the work in Davidson or with the work in Venda, that would have been a great thing for me. But that never happened. I spent 5 years with Leslie in that particular area. We came back to California. We've done some work in this area and other areas around about. But that's exactly how the mission work goes. And so what I'm thinking about for you as you go through your mission experience and the things that are going through your mind is it possible that you and I can go out on short missionary excursions and be effective in preaching the gospel? And I'm absolutely convinced that this is something that we need to consider right now. There's a growing movement. It's not part of the Church of Christ. I'm not going to be mentioning any names about other religious groups. But this group now, not only has it been sending out its young men right out of high school for 2 years, it is now considering that those who are retired are prime candidates to be a tremendous influence in the mission field. Sometimes we think about our retirees as individuals who've done what they're supposed to do. They've accomplished everything that they can accomplish, and now it's time for them to just sit back, put their feet up, drink coffee, and just look at the TV and just idle away their years. But you realize that the potential that exists amongst our retirees is an absolutely phenomenal force. And that if those individuals who retire, whether it be 60 or 65 or maybe even 70, that the wherewithal, the power that they have to not only communicate the gospel to others, but to be a source of strength to existing mission fields, what a power that would be for the work of the church. And so perhaps that's something that we as the Church of Christ really need to be thinking about in our own mission experience. But consider some of these things. Philip went to Samaria. Peter went to Caesarea. Barnabas went to Antioch. Paul and Barnabas went on their first missionary journey to Cyprus and then thereabout. Paul and Barnabas and Silas and others went again on a second missionary journey to Syria. Paul and others went on a third missionary journey to Galatia. And so all this time, Paul and those who were associated with his missionary work were thinking, where can we go? Should we start in one place and just stop there? We know that at the end of Paul's life, he was still thinking, here I am in a Roman prison, but I need to go to Spain. If only God would help me to get out of this place that I can go and continue. I've been to Macedonia. I've been to Italy. I've been to all these different places. Now, where else can I go? So the question comes down to us is, have we, or have you, who are part of this congregation here in Murrieta, arrived yet? Is this what you you are called to have accomplished in your time. This building, this congregation, 300 people on a Sunday morning, is this what God has called you to accomplish? Well, of course He has. But is that where you need to stop? Or is God saying to you, we have a whole world of people out there that need the gospel, and the world needs somebody just like me and somebody just like you with your talents to reach out and to touch the world. You see, that's part of the mission program, part of the mission spirit that we need to get a hold of. Now let's consider a second thought. There were missionaries who went to different lands because they needed to emigrate. In Acts chapter 11, verse 19, it speaks about some who left after Stephen's death. They went to Phoenicia. There were two great dynamics that were working in the early church. And the one was persecution. Now, I pray to God that we'll never be persecuted here in the United States. But do you realize that persecution is one of the dynamics that caused the church to really blossom and grow and to burst at its seams and to just simply reach across the world? It's because they were no longer able to stay in that one place and just be comfortable at home. Peter speaks about this, and also James speaks about this in 1 Peter and also in James chapter 1. That at the destruction of Jerusalem, let me just back up just a little bit. How many apostles went out throughout the whole world preaching the gospel in the early days? Was it Peter and Paul? You read about other apostles going out and preaching the gospel. Well, I'm confident that they were preaching the gospel in Jerusalem. But Jerusalem is not where God wanted the gospel to remain and stay as it had with the Judaizing system, where they just felt like Jerusalem is the only place that we need to be. So the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70, people begin to reach out and to emigrate throughout the entire known world, preaching and teaching the gospel. Sometimes we think to ourselves, I wonder if God can use me. Do I have the wherewithal to preach the gospel? If you ask that question, ask yourself this question too. How much knowledge do you really think the apostles had when they began preaching the gospel of Jesus Christ? Did they have a PhD in missions, principles and practices? Did they have a master's degree in family counseling? Did they have a bachelor's degree in Bible from Abilene Christian University or Pepperdine University or any of these other universities? No. At the very death of Jesus Christ, these disciples were still thinking to themselves, what's this all about? Is this really what God has spoken about in old time? Am I a part of something, or should I just go back home? And that's exactly what they did. So when Thomas comes finally to that room where the other disciples had been, where they had seen Jesus previously, he's still thinking to himself, I'll not believe unless I see with my eyes, unless I can put my hand into the place where the spear went into his side. So right at the very last moment of the disciples preaching the gospel, or at least Jesus preaching the gospel, the disciples are still thinking to themselves, is this really what the Old Testament has been all about? So, when we think about our own lives, is there something that I can offer the world? Absolutely. We, each and every single one of us, have unique talents that we can share with other people. Some time ago, I received a degree in counseling. And one of the interesting things that I learned while I was there was this. Do you realize who the most effective counselors are? They're people with master's degrees or PhDs? No. They're people just like you and me who are willing to sit down and listen. You see, the greatest thing that we can do is is not so much think about mass evangelism, about touching the hundreds of millions or thousands or maybe just even hundreds of people. But it's the fact that we touch people one by one. And that we allow God to do His work in us. When Peter preached the gospel, and he preached the gospel magnificently, so much so that the Bible says that 3,000 people were baptized. But you want to know who was adding to the church? Was it the fact that Peter preached the gospel that all these people came to know about Jesus Christ? Well, yes, he was the instrument. But who was adding to the church? In Acts chapter 2, around about verse 47, it says that God was adding daily those who were being saved. And so we must never leave out of the equation that it is God that is working through us. When I look about and I see people in the church today, and I wonder what potential lies within each and every one as individuals, but also individuals being collective together, working as a team. What tremendous potential is there to work not only in South Africa, but in Indonesia? And what about South America? And what about Russia? And what about also in the Middle East right now, where there is so much turmoil? Do we have a place in those areas where we need to be mission-minded? So, what can we be doing about things in the future? How are we going to plan for the future? Consider this, that when those individuals who stayed in Jerusalem remained fervent about their work, there were individuals coming to Jerusalem and listening to the gospel. Preaching was taking place there so effectively that people went out again to preach the gospel. Well, what was it that made up these individuals that were so unique and so different that people began to listen to them and to consider what it was that they were teaching? I've got a couple of ideas for you that I'd like to share with you this time. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5 and verses 20 to 21, by all means read this. I'm just going to highlight these thoughts because I think they are so important. What was the message and who was the messenger? These individuals were messengers of reconciliation. What was it in your mind that Jesus really came to do and to preach about? What was his central message? What was it that really touched your heart when you were thinking about Christianity? Wasn't it forgiveness of sins? You see, what people need to have and need to know about more than anything else is that they can have their sins dealt with. I don't know if you wrestle with this, but if you wrestle with this as Christians who come to a place like this every single Sunday, what about people who don't come to church because they don't know about the church? Don't they also wrestle with their sin in their life? Of course they do. That's the most important thing for us to have in our minds, is that people in the world are really wrestling with their sinfulness and how do they relate to God. People feel alienated. And we as ministers of reconciliation have the key. You might consider somebody who works with you or is one of your associates in some particular line of work or play. But I would wager that person in their private moments thinks very, very deeply and is very, very concerned about their life, their eternal life. The second thing is 2 Corinthians chapter 1 verses 3 through 6, that we are comforters for Christ. I don't know whether you thought about yourself as being a counselor or just being an aid to somebody else. But one of the greatest things that we can do for other individuals is to just simply put our arm around them. I bet that you know as many people as you can raise on your hand, many fingers that you have, that like you put your arm around them. We're called to be comforters. In 2 Corinthians chapter 5 and verses 15 through 16, we are called to be a fragrance of Christ. Isn't it a wonderful thing that when people come into our presence, that just simply everything just seems to brighten up? Have you noticed that there are individuals like this? They have a wonderful smile. Their eyes are nice and bright. They sparkle. And when they leave, you feel like somehow you've been touched by their presence. I could point at a number of people. I'm thinking of Mickey Bates right now. The influence that she had when I was here working with the church.